Okay, on to business. Let's talk inventory. As mentioned, I'm Erin and I am your Member Services and Solutions Manager. And with me is Jessica, who is your Trade Show and Event Manager. She'll take over after Rick is done and handle all of the questions. Just a few housekeeping tips. Everyone is muted. So if you have any questions, there should be a chat function at the bottom of your screen. So type in any of the questions that you may have and Jess will facilitate them with Rick at the end. Finally, the slides will be sent out and will also be posted on our website. So who's presenting today's webinar? Well, that would be Rick, Reed, and Patty. Supply Chain Canada is the leading and largest association representing supply chain management professionals, setting the standards of excellence from professional skills, knowledge, and integrity. Representing nearly 6,500 members working across the private and public sectors, Supply Chain Canada is the principal source of supply chain training, education, and professional development in the country. Through its 10 provinces and territory institute, Supply Chain Canada grants the Supply Chain Management Professional designation, the highest achievement in the field and mark of strategy supply chain leadership. Rick Reed has over 20 years of supply chain management experience working in both the private and public sectors. Prior to becoming Executive Director for Manitoba Institute, Rick served as the President of Supply Chain Canada Manitoba, as well as 2 terms as the Director of Supply Chain National Board of Directors, and as the Chair of the SCMA Foundation Council. Rick has held the position for ED of Supply Chain Canada Manitoba Institute for 6 years and specializes in helping organizations optimize their supply chains by developing strategies to maximize efficiency, reliability, and profitability. He has contributed to the success of this organization by helping to eliminate waste, mitigate risk, and reduce cost. So if you want more information, please check out their website at www.supplychaincanada.com. All right, Rick, well, take it from here and let's talk all about inventory optimization.
Yeah, an exciting topic. Let's just jump on there. Perfect. All right. So hello, everyone. Thank you, Erin, for the introduction. Inventory optimization is something that most organizations don't really take a look at, at least very seriously. It's critical to the success of your organization. It's critical to achieving strategy. It's critical to achieving your growth. But unfortunately, it's often relegated to one of the tasks that people get to, or they kind of hip shot it and don't always get the results that they should be. Inventory optimization, I hope that's come up properly. Basically, it's being able to meet your target service levels with the minimum amount of inventory. It allows you to ensure that you have what you need available when you need it, while reducing your inventory costs and minimizing the risks that come with having excess stock or overstocks, which can include shrinkage, obsolescence, damage, all those sort of things, poor cash flow, a whole bunch of stuff. When you want to optimize inventory, though, it's more than just making an arbitrary decision of I'm going to bump up something because it's going well, so I'm going to order more, or I'm going to buy bulk because I get a better price, or I'm going to just arbitrarily remove things from my warehouse and send them back or sell them on a sale or something like that. It's a process. What I'm hoping to give you today, though, is a takeaway. The takeaways I want you to get is a relationship between inventory performance and your business performance. The better your inventory performs, the more successful your business will be. Quite simply, you'll be more profitable, you'll have better costs, you'll have less shrinkage, less obsolescence. You'll simply have increased sales because you have the right product in the right place at the right time. And this is also why inventory management needs to be part of your strategic decision making. It's too often left at a tactical level with somebody that's doing buying, or it's an afterthought as you've gone through all the things about how you're going to build your sales. And then you say, well, we're going to need some inventory and we're going to do this. But it really needs to be part of your strategic decision making, because it is a huge part of how you're going to deliver those goods and services to your customers. It's also a huge investment in some cases to your organizations, often either the most expensive expenditure or the second to labor, one of the two. What I want to do is I want to start with an example and to kind of give you a basis of, as I go through these steps, how it relates in a business sense. Now, the example is from the optical industry. And you might say, well, optical industry, lumber industry, how is it going to relate? But the fundamentals of inventory optimization, inventory management are the same regardless of what industry you're from. And I just want to give you something where it may be a different industry, but where you can maybe see where this fits in to how it might work in your organization. I worked for a large optical organization. We had 75 stores across the country. We had 30 lab facilities that made glasses, as well as a main lab here in Winnipeg. They had a challenge when they brought me on board, and one of it was $9.2 million worth of inventory. And most of it, quite honestly, was junk. They had poor sales. They were declining. And it was mainly because of the stock out situation, where they had 1,200 frames that were on display in all these stores, and upwards to 20-25% of them were always out of stock. And unfortunately, it was their best sellers. And eyeglasses are a fashion item. And if you don't have the right fashion item, it doesn't get bought. And so what happened was, you didn't have the best sellers. People come, they look, they don't like, they leave, and they go somewhere else and they buy elsewhere. So they had a real challenge. My team and I, over 18 months, were able to reduce that 9 million down to 4.9. We were able to reduce those stockouts from 20-25% down to less than 0.5%. And we were actually able to increase sales as a result of our efforts, between 3 to 5%. Things that organizations would like to see. And my problem was that we did such a good job on it that it made us a great buy, and we got purchased by a larger organization. So with this, that's the result. This organization, though, just to give you an idea of the complexity, global supply chains, 60 to 180 day lead times, minimum orders of anywhere from 25 to 150 pieces per color on what we were doing. And we were dealing with companies from Korea, Japan, China, Italy, United States, and elsewhere. Israel was another one. So they were coming from all over. So it was very complex. So what did we do? Well, we were focused on these. I guess I should touch on this first. Is why should you care? Because these are the things that inventory optimization will do for you. They will give you improved customer service, because the better in-stock position you have of the right items, customers will come back. They will be loyal to you because they know that they can go to your organization, they can get what they need on the items that you've selected. It'll increase sales because a better in-stock position of the right items will allow you to sell more in position, when you have the opportunity. Your cash flow, better inventory assortment will allow you to improve your cash flow, because you're going to have greater turns, because you're going to be selling the right stuff. You're going to have the right stuff in stock to sell it, and you're going to have less of those dogs that you get that sit there forever and ever and don't move. You're going to have lower costs, whether it be inventory carrying costs, shrinkage, etc., because you're going to have inventory that's in your warehouse or on your shelves less time, and it's going to be moving more often. And you're not going to have those things that you're going to have to, get fed up with and move off and go stick in the corner somewhere in that back room that every organization has. You're going to increase profitability because, again, by focusing on those items that are driving your business, you're going to be able to purchase better on those. You are going to be able to take advantage of volume purchases. You're going to be able to take advantage of other things that are going to allow you to reduce the physical cost of those items, and thus maintain or improve your margins to make more money. And you're going to be more competitive. Having the right items in stock are going to allow you to be able to make those deals right then and there, to make sure that you're able to capture those sales and that customer now, rather than let them walk out the door. I've been in your business. I grew up in the lumber business. And I know one of the things that my father always taught me was, if you got somebody with money in their hand, make it easy for them to spend it, because if they walk out the door, there's a good chance you're not going to see them come back. And inventory is one of those ways that will help you do that. Having the right product in the right place, which is your location, at the right price and the right quantities, is going to allow you to be more competitive. It's going to allow you to increase your sales, and you're going to increase your profitability as a result. So how do you optimize? So how did we go about, when I talk about my example from the optical industry, how did we go about that? And as an overview, I'm going to go through these, but you have to understand and analyze your demand. You have to understand how your inventory is performing now. Where is it strong? Where is it weak? Where have you got a winner? Where have you got a dog? And you need to understand that. And not all inventory is going to be the same. We'll talk about that in a minute. You need to improve your forecasting. Too often not organizations, because forecasting is not easy. And the first rule of forecasting is it's always wrong. It's not a matter of being exact. It's about a matter of how far am I wrong? What is the range, plus or minus, that I was wrong? And the goal is to keep that range as narrow as possible to minimize issues of either being running out or having too much. So forecasting is a science in itself. Determining your stock levels. Once you've determined, you analyze your inventory, you understand the demand, you need to be able to figure out, okay, what are my stock levels? What am I going to keep? And what stock level am I going to keep it at? Establishing replenishment schedules and quantities. When am I going to reschedule? Am I going to, do it automatically, like a Kanban system, or am I going to do a periodic system where I order it the first of every month? When am I going to do this? And you need to figure out, one, what the schedule is, and then the quantities that you want to do it on. Align your storage space or your retail space accordingly. Your best items or your best moving items should always be in the high traffic areas, or, if it's a retail, or flip side, if you're in a warehouse environment, the items that you go get to the most frequent should be closest to where you need them, because you want to reduce those steps. And that comes to that efficiency of things, where you want to make sure you keep those critical items closest to where they're being used or where they're going to be purchased. Have an exit strategy is another one. And this is really, when I've been in organizations, this is one that really is a struggle for people to come up with. And we'll talk a little bit about that. But have an exit strategy. What are you going to do? How are you going to get yourself out of a bad buy? What are you going to do? And how are you going to do it? And when are you going to do it? I mentioned improved supplier management because as much as inventory is very much something that you usually have on site, a lot of organizations don't really consider how I can use my suppliers more effectively for certain items, or how I can use them to help reduce lead times or improve that customer service. And we want to talk a little bit about that. And enhanced replenishment is more about, how do I integrate more with my key suppliers? How do I share more information? How do I get more of the information they need to make better, quicker decisions on my behalf? How do I get it to them quicker so that they can do things where it doesn't rely on a human intervention from my team? And we'll talk a little bit about that as well in a few minutes. So understanding demand, this is the biggest one, and it takes some time to analyze what's going on, but it's critical to optimizing your inventory. It determines what you're going to carry, how much you're going to carry, within that location. It's also going to highlight which items are most critical to the success of your business. And that's probably, for the takeaway from this, is the single biggest thing I'd like you to take away, is understanding how really analyze your inventory and understand what's driving your success is the first step in being able to help yourself succeed. And the way you do it is you're going to take the raw numbers and you're going to be looking at what is going to be in terms of volume, dollars, like the overall volume, what is the highest? And you're also going to look at frequency, and you're going to compare the two. But generally, as a rule, what I've done just for speed is I usually take a look at dollars. I usually look at the cumulative value of what's being purchased. So what we're talking about here, I'm going to flip to the next one, is what I like to do, is you're going to want to look at, when you're forecasting, like once you've analyzed your demand and you're forecasting, you're going to want to look at these things. You're going to want to take a look at what's past performance. What was last year's performance? How many of these 2x4s did I sell last year? How many of this paint did I sell last year? How much of, this insulation did I sell last year? What were the trends? What was it like? So past performance is part of what you're going to look at. You're also going to look at product life cycles. Where is a product? Like if when you're in an introduction phase of a product, what's going to happen is you're going to have steep demand on a runner, something that's really going to go, you're going to have it go out of sight. And you need to be planning for that. If you're introducing something new and initial indications are that it's going to be a runner for you, then you need to be able to take that into account as to what's going on. But if it's on the decline, if it's something that's there, that's steady, that's not declining anymore, you're going to look at that differently, and you're going to have to apply a different set of rules to that if it's on decline, where it's steady, but it's declining in sales. Seasonality comes into it. You're going to know that certain things are going to sell more at different times of the year. You guys all see that. Trends, what's happening in trends is something like sustainability coming in, where people want products that are, that are less maintenance, where they want to have, that composite decking and rails and that sort of thing rather than treated, right? And you see the trend is people are going to more towards less work rather than the look, of that wood look. Those trends you need to consider. Other factors, what are your planned sales? What are competitors' activities? What are some of the external events that are going on? In this case, the best example is the pandemic. What is the impact of pandemic and right now having on your business? And how is it going to impact what you're going to forecast is what you're going to use? So the first step is analyze inventory and make sure you understand what are the runners and what are the dogs. You're going to take a look at your forecasting. And as I said, you're going to look at these variables. You're going to want to make sure you improve how you forecast, because the better you forecast, the more improvement you're going to see in your inventory performance. And again, don't trust your gut. Gut can come into it, but gut's what's going to get you into some bad buys. Trust the numbers is when you get into your forecasting. So we talked about analysis, and I want to focus a little more on this. Doing an ABC analysis, some of you are probably familiar with this, but an ABC analysis is probably the most effective technique that you have to determine the relative importance or value that an item has to your organization. And it's going to allow you to know which products are most critical, which ones are moderately critical, and which ones are just there, that are just part of the sales. You're going to want to take any sale that you can. But when you look at inventory optimization and you're looking at your business, the critical thing is make sure that the majority of your effort is focused on those items that are most important to your business success. Now, science and all this has come up with this, and everybody's familiar with the 80-20 rule or the Pareto principle. And when you go through your analysis of your inventory and you're sliding and you're putting it into 3 categories, A, B's, and C items, what you're generally going to find, give or take a few percentage points, but for the most part, what you're going to see is that 80% of your business is being driven by 20% of your items. That's the most critical things that you need for your business. What are those 20%? And how much of those things do you have in stock? How well are you managing those? How well are you forecasting those items? So that's the first part. 20% of your business, or 80% of your business is driven by 20% of your items. And then you're going to have another 30% that aren't quite as important, right, as the group A items, but they're not, minimal like they would be for a C. And that's usually about 25 to 30% of your items. And they make up about 15% of your total volume, in terms of the importance to your company. And then you have the other 50%, of the stuff that's left over, right? And lots of items, huge breadth in terms of numbers, but the impact to your business is only about 5%, 5 to 10 maybe. And so the question is, if you're going to put your effort in, if you're going to make the investment on optimizing anything, the goal is to optimize the A items. That's where most of your attention should be. I've always been one, when I looked at this, I do this analysis, and every organization that I've ever been in over my 20, 25 years in the business is I do look at my B items. I do try to make sure I optimize. I go through the same process with them, and I do come up with strategies on my C items and how I manage them. And we'll talk a little bit about that in a minute. But what I always did was I always made sure that my A items were covered, because I knew that if my A items were, if my inventory in the items was dead on, where if I had them identified, I had them properly inventoried, I had a proper system for replenishing them, and I monitored them constantly to understand how things that were happening were impacting them. If I took care of that, then I was 80% of the way there. If I could improve that and I could actually increase the number of sales that 20% was driving, business was doing well and things were taken care of. I knew that as a whole, the business was not going to fail in that sense if I was doing well. If I could make sure that how I was positioned this and how I inventoried these items was able to support the business effectively, I knew that we were in good shape. Everything else afterwards in the B items and the C items, I still optimize those, but anything that I gained for any value I gained from there was gravy. Because if I took care of the 80%, the 20% and how well I managed that just became gravy. And that's a big shift from how a lot of organizations that I've been involved with have looked at it. They've looked at everything as the same. They've treated them all the same. And they've looked at something critical, for, a building center like many of you guys have, where you need to have shingles, and treating that the same as, the spar packs with brass screws. And you just simply don't do that, because if you're in the building industry and you're in a lumber yard and you're, supplying contractors, you need to have shingles. If you don't have shingles, you're taking a key piece out of what you need to do to be that full meal deal for those contractors. Whereas, not having brass screws, on your spar packs isn't going to make a huge impact on your bottom line or on your customer impacts. So this is probably, one of the most important exercises you're going to go through is understanding what items are driving your business. And if you do that and you start your strategies, you will have, success. You will see, improvements in your bottom line and your company's performance. This is just a quick example. A items contribute most to the overall profitability and success of your business, require the most attention. B items contribute moderately to the success of the business and obviously require some moderate attention, make sure that they're not out of hand. And C items contribute the least overall, to the success. You manage them, but you find ways to manage them with the least amount of human intervention, on that. And you also really take a hard look at whether or not you want them in stock or whether you have another way of delivering on them. So once you've taken a look at, you've analyzed and you've got your ABC items, you've looked at your forecasting where you've, taken a look at all these variables, you've included these different variables on that, you've added in, factoring for service levels, which I'll touch on in a minute. You've talked, for safety stocks, you've done all that sort of thing. At some point then you need to start taking a look, okay, what am I going to set my inventory levels at? And what you want to do is you want to have a business rule for each of those categories. You want to have a set of business rules that apply to your A items. You want to have a set of business rules that apply to your B items, and you want to have one that's going to apply to C's. And you don't want, and again, there might be some similarities, but there's going to be significant differences in how you treat them. You're going to want to establish stock levels or, and service levels for each of these items. And we're going to talk about service levels just in a half second, the next slide. But you want to set a service level. And the service level is, it's easily defined. How many times am I going to go to that shelf and find the item that I'm looking for on that shelf where it belongs? Like, what is the percentage of times that I'm going to be able to go there and be able to get what I need? And setting business rules for your customers. And this is more of a, how do you explain it to your customers? Because what happens is that customers often think, well, I'm going to go down to the hardware store and I'm going to get, they're going to have everything. The question is, you need to also start managing your customers on what their expectation is. And you want to be pushing that, yes, we will have these items, right? All the time. These items, you might have to expect a 2-day delivery. You might have to expect a week on these things, or, or simply we don't have them. So you need to start taking a look at this. This isn't just the inventory on the expense side. It's how do you communicate your inventory policy to your customers to help manage their expectations so that when they come to the store that you can meet or exceed the expectations rather than have them come and be disappointed because you're not managing C items like you used to. Just jumping back for a sec, just on that. If I'm on this, when I'm looking at this screen, If I'm anybody, when I was managing this, when I was in the real world, so to speak, if I screwed up on an A item, right? If I really mess something up on that, unless, that's something that to me would be where I would expect that I get myself fired for, because this is business critical. And you need to be able to have somebody that's giving you the attention it needs, appropriate for that is business critical. And so I viewed it quite that way, that if I screwed something like that up, I deserve to be showing my dinner on a roadmap, so to speak. Service levels are kind of tricky. And this is all math. When you're talking about, setting your inventory levels, there's a combination of taking a look at what is my average usage over the period of time which I'm looking at. And the longer that period of time, the better that average is going to look. However, there's still a standard deviation, plus or minus, that comes in within that performance over time. And you need to account for that when you're accounting for inventory levels. And then you need to take a look at, well, what's the service level that I want to do? And there's a factor that you apply for service levels. And then there's a factor that you apply for your safety stock. This is part of the calculation of your safety stocks. So what happens is, it's all just math, analysis and math. But when it comes to service levels, a lot of people think, well, I want to have 100%. In all the years that I calculate inventories, I never plan for a 100% service level. The most that I would get to is 90%. And the reason being is, and the graph, it kind of illustrates it, as you can see on here, it goes up, and here's the 90%. But as you can see, profitability climbs, and it meets at 90%. This is the sweet spot. This is where you want to be. Because as you can see, profitability starts to decline for everything after. The reason is the cost to trying to get this extra 10% drastically is over what the return you're going to get. You're going to spend more money to get 1% than you're going to get on being able to sell that sale. And this is a hard thing for people to get around. They think, well, I should have everything. It should be here all the time. Yes, that is the goal as best you can. And you need to be able to have contingencies as you optimize your inventory. Is if I'm planning for a 90% service level, which, in practice, if your replenishment cycles and that are good, generally, performs a little better than that. But if you plan for that, you do need to have a system in place that you can respond quickly if you're finding that you're constantly running out of stock or you're having issues with sales. But the key on this thing is understanding that 100% is financially and business-wise a loss leader. It's going to cost you money trying to get to 100%. And what you need to do is, you find this balance. You can meet customer demand. You can have systems to handle the exceptions. But as you can see here, you're in the business of making money, not giving money away. And that's where you want to make sure you make this hard decision. And this is a hard thing for a lot of organizations to get their head around sometimes. You want to measure your inventory performance. What gets measured gets done, but in this case, you want to measure, you want to have a robust system for measuring the performance of your inventory. Now, the most obvious one that most people are, probably familiar with is, what are your turns? You can do that, but what are, appropriate turns for your organization? What turns do you want to have? Like, do you turn your inventory, a couple times a year, 3 times a year, 10 times a year? Do you look at it everything, or do you, again, split it up into my A, B, and C items? What kind of turns do I want to have? I can accept low turns on a C item because the value is generally going to be low. And, in terms of the inventory I keep or the volume that's happening, I can live with low turns on that. But I'm probably going to want higher turns on those high moving A items because it's going to improve my cash flow. And as we all know, cash is king. But you're going to want to take a look at things like stockouts. How many stockouts? What's the frequency of stockouts? What's being stocked out, right? What's going on with my replenishment? What's the cause of it? Is it replenishment? Is it the wrong minimum order quantities? Is it the wrong inventory levels? Did I miss something in my forecasting in terms of a trend or competitors' activity, or did the sale do better? You need to be looking at that. Same with back orders, very similar idea. What's the cause? Fill rates is another one, because you can plan for your inventories, but if you can't trust your suppliers to provide what you need, if you're constantly getting, an 85% fill rate on your orders, you've planned for 100%. And if this person's constantly sending you, an 85% fill rate, 15% less, it's going to impact your ability to have your inventory perform as it should. So you need to be either looking at correcting what's going on with that with your supplier, or maybe you need to be looking for a new supplier. But you need to be looking at those fill rates and understanding what's causing them and how is it impacting you. And the most obvious thing, and unfortunately what happens is if you have somebody that's unreliable and you can't change them, you have to bump up your inventory to account for the uncertainty, which costs you more money, and it raises the risks of overstocks, obsolescence, shrinkage, et cetera, all the usual things. Obsolescence, obviously, buying too much, it's maybe not as bad in the lumber industry, but it can be in others where you have the change of things happening so quick that all of a sudden, 1 minute you have the latest, greatest on your shelf, and all of a sudden, the first of next month, it's now not. It's the second generation, and you've got the second generation come out, and somebody else has got the latest, greatest on you. Now, what do you do to get out of this position? Shrinkage, obviously, high value items. You always got to worry about overstock of those and it disappearing. Expediting costs. What are your expediting costs? How many times do you have to go do that rush order to get something to somebody because you ran out of inventory on something critical for that important customer? And other exceptions. And again, this could be big swings in demand. What do you do if you have a big run on something? I know in your industry this year, the shortage of treated lumber has been horrendous, and yet everybody's home wants to do more decks and fences and that, and so the demand took off and the supply dried up. So the question is, looking at those things, what impact have they had on what's happening, and what strategies, if it's something you anticipate is going to happen again, what strategies can you take, to help you mitigate that damage or that risk going forward. And have an exit plan. So just before I go into exit plan, so what we did when we were talking about, when I talk about the example I gave you at the beginning, is we did exactly that. I analyzed all that inventory. And what I found was that we had a situation where our own processes were hurting us, because we had processes where we would have these 1,200 frames on a board. The marketing people independently would introduce 30 new ones, that would be the latest, greatest fashion items. And then they would show up. And of course, everybody in the stores, all the retail people that are on the floor would say, hey, look at all these new items we got. And they'd be pushing all the 30 new items. But what would happen is nobody took a look at the cannibalization that was happening, where this, wireframe brown, eyeglass frame that all of a sudden brand new, introduced in the introduction phase of their life cycle, took off like a rocket. Meanwhile, this other thing that was very similar, but just a slightly different shade of brown, that was selling maybe 100 units a month, all of a sudden went from 100 down to 2 or 3, just like that. And so this started cannibalizing this. The problem is on this side, the one that was at 100, my inventory was based around selling 100 of those a month. I had 60, 180 lead time. So I had product on the water coming over from Asia based on 100 units a month. And all of a sudden I was sitting there going, maybe I had about 3 weeks of inventory, maybe a month's of inventory in this item. And just because I introduced this went from having a month's inventory and dead on to all of a sudden I had maybe 5, 6 years worth because of this. And there was no interaction. And this is part of why I said at the beginning, you need to have inventory management. What you're doing has to be part of your strategic decision making, because decisions here can have impacts over here sometimes with some of your products. And you need to do that. The other thing that was happening was on the purchasing side is the inventory thing was, well, we need to have stuff. We have to have this product. We're not having sales are down. So we need to make sure we don't run out of stock. And they were ordering the minimum of everything right across the board. They weren't really looking at, impacts of cannibalization or different things that were happening. And so they just kept ordering the max after these things were happening. And what it was doing is these orders would come in for this item that was, that used to be performing well, that went down to 2. We had all this extra inventory come in, and then it just sat because it didn't sell because everybody's buying the new one. So what that did is it started gradually over those years. That's what accounted for that $9.2 million worth of crap, is because their buying habits, they didn't turn the tap off fast enough because they weren't measuring performance. And so it allowed The other process is just to continue adding to the problem before somebody took a look at it and stopped it. And that's what part of what I did was. And then part of what I did was just implementing a business rule within house was I created an artificial floor where, and it was again based on math saying, hey, when an item got to a certain point, it was a leading indicator that it was on its way out on its decline. So what I did was I had an artificial floor I put in that allowed me to turn off the tap so that I bled through the remaining inventory, but I didn't order any new stuff. And it started to minimize it as itself. So you need to have, a plan where you measure performance and you're looking at cause and effect, and you apply what you're learning as quickly as possible to your policies. And you need to make sure your policies and your practices are integrated so all the parties are talking to each other. And that not only includes the ones inside your organization, but your key people outside the organization, your suppliers and your main customers as well. So something else that I've done consistently, and this one's a hard one to get people's head around, is have an exit strategy or have an exit plan. How do you get out of something that is not performing? How do you get out of a bad buy? What are you going to do? And what I usually did was, as I said, just like I talked about with the frames, I established minimum performance levels for an inventory item. If an item is not performing at a certain level, I didn't keep it. And we'll talk about what I do with those things in a minute. But you need to say, okay, if it's not here, what's that floor? And if it doesn't meet this, it's not worth my time and effort to keep it on there. It's not worth my investment into the inventory. It's not worth looking at it for years and years and counting it at every inventory for the next God knows how long. It's not gonna really significantly contribute to my profitability and my bottom line. It's just gonna cause me time and effort. So taking a look at that's the first step. Is once you've analyzed it and you know what's going on, set minimum performance levels. Trust the numbers. A low performing item is just costing you time and money. I have a yard next door to me across the way here. And when I was doing another session, I took some pictures of some stuff as examples. And you can see they have these cartons that have been sitting out there, and it's got the inventory count from 2014, 15, 16. And when you look at the numbers, it only changes by 2 or 3. And they've got hundreds of these things in these cases. That's money. That's your money that gets tied up that you can't get rid of. If you don't make a decision on it. So you want to make sure you trust the numbers. If it's not performing, get it out of your way. And one of the ways I do it is I create what's called a quarantine area. I actually mark it off. I have it. And basically, if an item falls within that, the low performing item, it goes in there. If I get a return or if I get something that I don't know what to do with, it goes into that area. And the goal is that we do exactly that, have a 24-hour rule where a disposition has to be made within 24 hours of that, of what to do. Do we toss it? Do we recycle it? Do we resell it? Do we move it on? Do we return it? What are we going to do? And the idea is to deal with these things, touch it once, be done with it, take the hit if you're going to take a hit, but deal with it, because it's just going to, because time is money. Having it cluttering up your space. All you guys have X number of square footage in your operations. What is the profitability per square foot? What is the minimum performance level that an item needs to be? What does its contribution have to be per square foot to justify it having space in your operation? Because if it doesn't hit that number, right, then it's costing you money and you should get rid of the thing. And then find other ways to supply it if you need to. But you make the disposition. And part of what I did, and there's different ways you can do it. And I mentioned them. You can recycle, you can toss, you can give away, you can donate. When I was at that optical company, we had $15,000 worth of obsolete sunglasses that we couldn't sell to save our lives because they were just out of stock. They were just out of style. And I found a conference where we donated it for a tax receipt to give them away. So, welcome to sunny Manitoba. And they were a giveaway, during registration process. So we got a tax write-off on it. But the thing is that, you may want to take a look at, do I have somebody? Is there other manufacturers or people that can use this stuff? Can it be repurposed for something else where I get somebody to come in? Can I auction it? Which is a tool that I've used quite often, where I just say, hey, you know what? We get the lots, we just bundle it up and we send it to auction. We let the auctioneer take care of it, and we just take our money. But the thing is, it's out of our hair, and it frees up the space to be able to put something in that's one of the A items that's a big mover that actually drives profitability for your organization rather than just sit there and tie up cash. So develop a policy. What is it? Like I said, come up with a quarantine area. What's the policy for the removal of an item? Functional versus book value is something to keep in mind. One of the biggest challenges I had in any organization is usually with the CFO. And the CFO looks at it and say, hey, this item, is worth this much, it's worth this much on the books. We can't get rid of that. I'm going, but functionally, it's of no use to us. We're just counting it. It's collecting dust. It's in the corner. We're tripping over it. It's not actually driving new business. It's not driving profitability. It's not driving cash flow. It's just there. And an example, when I was in VAW, we built huge noise control systems for power generating stations for Pratt & Whitney and General Electric. I remember one of the biggest issues, I had these big stainless pieces, like these boxes that we used to think are like their size of, a small house in many cases. So we had this particular pieces to build a certain kind of noise control system with 409 stainless. And this thing had been around, they'd been around for a better part of 15, 16 years sitting in the, in the way. And they're big flat pieces, take up lots of space. And we hadn't built a unit of that in over 16 years in our location. And we had these two sets of this stuff. And the GE and Pratt & Whitney that used to be by it have moved on and changed their engineering and came up with new models they want us to build that didn't use this particular steel. They used different kinds of stainless now. And so the chances of us building another unit I have a better chance of winning the lottery than selling one. But the thing is, on the books, they had a significant value to it. And the biggest fight I had with the CFO was convincing him that functionally this was useless to us and it was better to just take the hit for the scrap steel and move on. So you need to get your head around that is, the book value makes it hard to make decisions on some items, but you need to look functionally. What does it do for us? Does it drive new business? Does it help drive profitability? Does it help improve cash flow? And if the answer is no to any of those, then you should be take the hit and move on. Move it out of the way and use the square footage that is taking up to apply it to more of an A item that helps you do those three things that I talked about. I suggest that you budget disposal. You have a budget for disposal of items every month. Like I said, you have the quarantine area 24-hour rule. There should be a budget for disposal or disposition every month. And the reason for that is just simply from accounting, because accounting and accountants and auditors, they don't like seeing big dumps of stuff right before year end. If you do it in a stage thing and you have a policy in place and they can see the stability of it, it looks better on your audits. And then maximize recovery efforts. As I said, auction, repurposing, recycling, reselling to somebody else, donating, just take a look at whatever you happen to do. And there's lots of ways that you can deal with that. Supplier management. And this is one where when you get into those items, when you start getting into C items, certainly that you feel you don't need to have, that don't add a benefit, even though it may not be big financially, or even some B items, you want to work with key suppliers. You're not going to do this to everybody. You're going to do it with your key suppliers. And you're going to take steps to shorten lead times. And some of them might be, hey, send me consignment. Like I'm going to date myself a little bit, but when we were in the lumber business back in Brandon, we used to deal with Wilmar windows before Geldwin bought them. And our deal with them is we used to get truckloads of windows. We get them come spot that trailer of windows right on our site to shorten that lead time to be able to go do those things. And then basically at the end of the month, we would just get a consolidated, we would just tell them, hey, this is what we sold, and we get a consolidated invoice and away we go. And then once we got down to a certain point, they brought a new truck out and they took the other one back. So there's things that you can do, but you can do that when with those key suppliers you have, figure out how you can do that. It could be staged orders at their location. If it takes a week lead time to do an order from start to finish, you might, pre-order it so they have an order stage for you that you can ship on, immediate notice, or you can pull from it if you needed to. You can go find new suppliers. You can consign items. There's a bunch of things, but you want to use suppliers, those key ones, particularly on A items, to find a way to shorten lead time. Because as I said, the number one rule of forecasts is always wrong. And when your forecasts directly impact what you're going to stock and how much, and if your forecast is wrong, then what happens, your inventory might be wrong. And then you do have to expedite. Hopefully you do it well enough, you don't have to expedite very often. But in the case you do, you want to have partners that can send you those A items very quickly with a very short lead time. Because if you want to be resilient, you want to be able to recover to that unexpected as quickly as possible. And shortening lead times is one of the easiest ways to do that. You want to increase your integration and information sharing with key suppliers. How do you share forecasts? How do you share actual sales on certain items? How do you get them to share back on availability of things? This is a hard one to get for people to get their head around too, especially if you're a smaller business where you're not used to it. But the more that you can integrate, what your contractors are doing into what you're doing, into what your suppliers are doing, and vice versa, the issues that are coming up or shortages or things that are going to happen to suppliers, how they impact you and how you can share that with your key customers. The more that information flow goes both ways, and the more you share that information, the easier it is for you to be able to make those inventory decisions on what to keep, how to replenish, how to shorten lead times, all that. It gets a lot easier because if everybody's pulling the same rope instead of keeping it all to yourself. So you want to be trying to integrate, information sharing as often as you can. And I'm not talking about, get together to buy you lunch. I'm talking about real numbers. And that's a real shift for people that traditionally maybe not have shared as much as they usually do. Another one you can do is, and this comes back to what I talked about earlier about those business rules, about inventory and what you do to your customers. What items are in stock and what items aren't in stock, but what is the timeline for them to get it? And how has it come to them? So you may want to ship directly from suppliers for certain items, right? You may want to have certain things here, but you might say, hey, look, here's the line. We're going to keep this, but these B items, what we're going to do is, to minimize inventory, we're going to take advantage of suppliers where we can order it and we can have it shipped overnight to wherever it happens to be, a la the Amazon model. But it saves you from having to bring it in, inventory it, put it on the shelf, physically take it, get it on a shelf, take it off, all the work that's involved, inventory it. So you may want to take a look at what items are conducive, and that's where I would be looking at B and C items for that kind of a scenario. Because what's going to happen is, if you can do that service, you can make it easy, where you can say, yeah, you can order here and I'll have it, it'll be to your place tomorrow. Done. No different than what a lot of people are going to do when they jump on Amazon and they buy those housewares and stuff that they may be buying from you, from somebody on Amazon where it shows up same way. Why give that up? Take care of what's good for your business, keep what you need to have, and then have a process, a robust process that allows you to, take advantage of those suppliers and that availability to perform just like Amazon would. Return unsold items. This is another one, because a lot of the things that I've had where, you've had that error and they go, well, I want to send it back, and they want a 10% or 20% restocking charge. If it's not driving business, if it's not improving profitability, and if it's not driving cash flow, it's not helping you. So that 20% hit that you're going to do to get rid of a problem, right? To free up that space to something that is driving those items is the way to go. It's worth that 20%. Why do you want to trip over something that's going to sit there for the next 2-3 years until you get fed up and you give it away for a song? It's going to cost you more than the restocking fee in most cases. Get rid of it. And that's part of where you're picking the right suppliers and having them involved, like I said, integrated, where they see what's going on, where they're part of that solution, where they understand that they can take it back and move it somewhere else. And then you, of course, reciprocate by, obviously, on the next item. Like, it becomes very much a relationship management and partnership in how you do this, because your success is their success. And it's no good to them, because if your stuff's tied up, right, then what are you going to do? Like, you can't, if what you have isn't selling, sales are down, cash flow is tight, are you going to be buying more stuff? No, you're going to be trying to minimize what you're doing. You're not going to try to expose yourself more. So bite the bullet, move on. And that's about it. I apologize with rushing through it. I know it's a high level. And I know I threw a lot of stuff at you. I've seen some chat things come up, so I'm thinking that we might have
Yes,
some questions.
we
Uh,
do. That's awesome.
So, so
Okay, so
I hope that,
you do. You have some great questions. So we've got some right off. And just to let everybody know that just use your chat function below and Erin and I are monitoring them. Erin, if I miss one, jump in and let me know. But the first question I have is, I think, a two-parter from Hafiz. What parameters do you use when classifying A, B, or C? And fill rate can impact. What would be classified as an A or a B? What would that be classified as, an A or B?
well, on an A and B, what I've usually do, like a quick and dirty way to do an ABC is basically take, pull out of your system, because imagine everybody's got some sort of a system. If you get it in Excel, it's a little easier, but what you want to do is you want a listing of your inventory. If you can get it into an Excel spreadsheet, and then what you do is you do the cumulative calculation. So basically you say, I've got, I sold 100 or 1,000 items of SKU 1, 2, 3, and the cost of that is $1. And so then the cumulative sales for the year is $1,000. And so you would work it out where you blow it up, where you take all your SKUs, how many you've sold, what do they cost individually, and what does accumulate for that, and then sort it by highest to lowest. And then what you do is from there, you're going to end up with, and you're going to total this, and you're going to get a number. And then what you want to do is you're going to say, okay, what's 20% of that number? So if you took everything and it came out to $100,000, and so that means $20,000, then what I do is I take a look on Excel and I just simply go down the boxes and I keep highlighting the box until I get to roughly 20,000, give or take a little bit.
Okay.
And right off the bat, that's going to give you a very quick and dirty idea of what are the most critical items. And so then you just insert a line in there, and then you're going to take a look at the next items that make up 30%. And that's going to roughly give you what your B items are. Now, you're going to have to do some analysis. You're going to have to take a look at those things. Like there is some more analysis to it, but as an idea, that's going to give you exactly what are the items that are driving your business.
Okay.
And that's where I start all the time is, okay, how am I ordering? How am I performing on these items? What is my fill rates? Am I getting stockouts? Am I this? What's my pricing look like? What does my inventory position look like? Where are they located in my warehouse? And I work on those first, and then I move on to the other items. And I think the second part of that question was,
you explain the parameters when classifying A, B, and C, and then fill rate can impact. What would fill rate be classified as, an A or a B? I'm thinking Hafiz, I hope that's right.
Fill rate is on all categories. Fill rate is about, if I order 100 units from that supplier, how often do I get the 100 units? Like every time I place an order, the fill rate is out of 10 orders I get from that supplier, how many times do I get 100% of what I ordered?
Okay.
So, and there's two ways to look at your fill rate. There's one is by line item, right? So if I order 10 items on that purchase order, how many of those items did I get? Did I get 100% of them, or did I get 90% of them?
Okay.
So that's the first thing that you take a look at. But the subsequent one you look at is, okay, so I look at this and it's not 100% across the board. I got shorted, but where did I get shorted? Did I get shorted on out of 10 items? How many got shorted? And the next thing is, out of each of those items, how many did I get shorted? So if I have 10 items and I got 9, I have a 90% fill rate on that in terms of SKUs. But then I take a look at it going, well, on that though, not only was it 90%, but I only got 50% of what I ordered on this item. Right? You need to take a look at so it's a fill rate for POs, gives you an idea of supplier performance.
Okay.
Then you need to take a look at the fill rate on the individual items on those things to get an understanding of the reliability of that supplier. Because if I have an item that's, I'm saying it's 100 units a month, so I'm keeping 250, I'm keeping 200, let's just say it's 250 is the max where I want to keep, right? And when I get down to 100, I order another 100, right? If I'm doing that, because I've got, because it makes sense, 100 a month, so I keep 200, 50 for safety stock. As soon as that 250 gets to 150, I order, because the lead time means it'll show up in time to get what I need. But if the supplier isn't sending me what I need to keep that, to top that back up, if they're sending me half of what I get, at some point, that usage is going to bleed that down and I'm going to run out. So you need to measure fill rates, and that's right across the board, whether it's an A, B, or C item.
Okay.
Thank you. I hope that answers the question, Hafiz. That was great. The next question, I don't have a name, but it's from SP. What role does the gross margin dollar earned from any item play in the ABC classification process? And how important is GMROI?
Well, it is and it isn't. I look at it in terms of frequency. Because you do look at the margin. I do look at the margins in the end, but what I look at is I look at the frequency. I look at what's driving. Like, what are people buying? What are they coming to us for? And how do I make sure that I have an in-stock position that allows me to meet that demand so that I don't have to turn that sale away, where I can get that money now. But once I've solved that, once I know that my inventory position is adequate to be able to meet the market demand where I'm not turning people away, then the next phase of what I'm doing is, then I'm getting into, okay, how am I buying it now? What can I do to improve that margin? What can I do to reduce those costs? And a good example, if I come back just from the industry, when I was with McDermott Lumber here, before McMunn's bought them, we had a challenge with our distribution center for just Big O, Weeping Town. We had the 3-inch solid, 3-inch perf, same with 4-inch. And what was happening is we were spending, anywhere from $50 to $250, $300 a day on having our main supplier run a truck out because we couldn't get our act together on inventories because we had poor inventory management. We had poor visual, we had a poor visual of what was going on. And so we think we had stock, and then all of a sudden they'd go to get something for that contractor. It's not there. They send it out. The contractor starts charging us back because their men are standing around waiting for us. I'm having to get a rush order out there, and then we got to get in a truck and get it over by itself. Like, it was a disaster. And so what happened was, when you talk about, it wasn't the gross margin on that, but what I did is we did exactly what I'm talking about. I analyzed the demand, and I realized that what we had set up for inventories at the distribution center was nowhere close to being what the reality was. So we readjusted that. And then what I turned around and did was, based on the average demand that we were seeing, I set up a weekly load of a standard inventory that would come and be delivered. And then as part of that, when I talk about integration, I had the distribution center guy, they did a count where I took a look at it. So that if we had some unexpected demand on some things where all of a sudden 4-inch perf was up higher than usual that didn't meet, then I could adjust my standard load accordingly before it went out. And so what happened was I went from several $100s a day to $50 a week.
Oh, wow. Okay.
Because of that cost. And so it's not a direct impact on what's going on, but it is an impact on the profitability of the organization. And that comes from that analysis of merging inventory strategy, optimizing it to business processes that make sense. And that's how you start driving, because once you get this fixed, then you start looking for those ways of, how do I reduce costs? How do I buy better? How do I go consignment? How do I buy more volume? How do I do things? How do I improve my ordering with them to make their life easier so that I can get a lower cost and then drive that margin up? So it's part of the discussion, and I look at it, and usually once I've set the inventory, I usually target which items I go first based on profitability. And I would go after the lower margin items first, and to try to improve that performance as they move down to ones that are better.
Oh, okay. That's, again, really communication and looking at your numbers is quite critical.
It is, yes.
I have a question from Lorinda. Question is, I guess I'll rephrase this. What is your suggested policy on stock adjustments? I don't know if you personally have a policy on that, but
stock adjustments. So stock adjustments in what, Lorinda, is it? Lorinda,
Lorinda. Yeah.
Lorinda, can you jump on and just tell me what you mean by stock adjustments? Can mean a couple of things.
Okay, Lorinda, if you have time to put it in the chat, let him to expand on that question. I'm going to move to the next question.
Sounds good.
From Cam, which is, how do you deal with new products that do not have EMU or sales data to work off in regards to initial orders and secondary or replenishment orders?
Yeah, there you go. Now that's where you earn your money.
Okay.
No, what I try to do is, this is not easy. And so what you need to do is, you need to, the first place you look is, are there like items that you've introduced? And you're never going to have apples to apples, but is there anything that's at least, similar enough that you can get, okay, what happened when we did this? A big part of this, and this is back to that sharing of information that I talked about, because I can make a guess. Whatever I guess, it's going to be wrong. as you said, the question is just how wrong am I? Am I close or am I here? Am I in the right ballpark or am I in the right universe? And that's really where the challenge comes in. But that's where you need to be engaging your suppliers. Whoever the supplier is in this, saying, hey, look, I don't know how this is going to go. This could take off or it could be a real dud. So, what have you done? What has been the performance you've seen in other places where you've introduced it? And look for, market where they've introduced it in markets that are similar to the one that you're operating in. Again, it's not 100% science, but at least you get a sense of what happened when they did that. And then what you want to do is, you kind of plan around that. You do your own reality check, talk to your staff, make sure you talk to people, and you're going to come up with a game plan. Okay, we're going to do this, but have the backup plan, that exit strategy that, where you're talking with your supplier, hey, look, if this doesn't go, this is coming back.
Yeah.
And then not only that is, if this thing blows up, how do we make sure? And that's where you might say, look, we're going to do this. How do I have this next order available? How do I stage this thing where it's ready to go? So on a moment's notice, I can get wheels under and get it out to me as quickly as possible. So it's a multifaceted approach where you're going to try to pull in like items you've introduced yourself, engage that supplier to find out what they've done elsewhere. If they haven't introduced it somewhere else already, at least similar products, same question. Well, what's been similar to this in terms of needs? And then work out, okay, one, this is coming back and there's going to be no restocking to it if it doesn't go. But how do we make sure that we have that next order that comes in? Because you're going to get some early indications on performance. If it takes off, you're going to have an idea that you're going to get the next order in. You got to have the next one ready to, the idea of what you're doing there. So you need to talk to them about how are they going to be able to support you if this thing takes off. And it's going to take almost daily monitoring to try to get some semblance of understanding where that level is. It's going to go up drastically, but then it is going to plateau. But you need to be able to monitor daily to see when that starts to happen.
Okay.
I know it's not a great answer.
It's an answer.
But really the biggest thing is lots of attention,
Okay.
lots of communication and lots of attention on those things.
So back to Lorinda, she did clarify. Her original question was, what is your suggested or your policy on stock adjustments? She was more specific: inventory stock count variances, products that are not for usage, permissions to generate stock adjustments, percentages based on sales or purchases.
Well, I would focus it around, so you're doing a cycle count and you're finding you're getting variances and you have to adjust inventories. It sounds like is what we're talking about. Well, the main thing is you need to do it. You need accurate inventory. You have to understand your in-stock position. There's nothing more frustrating to anybody than going to a store where, you check online and it says they've got 3 in stock and you go there and we don't have them.
Yeah.
Well, why did I waste my time? Or you say, hey, can you go get this? And well, it says we have 4, but we don't know where they are. Nothing more frustrating than that. And that comes back to that, and Patty's going to love this, but this is back to that customer service experience. Like you need to be able to meet or exceed those customer expectations. And so you have to have, that inventory has to be accurate so you know what position you're in. So if you're finding that there's differences, you have to investigate what's causing them. Did it get stolen? Did somebody take it, and is it off because somebody took it to their desk because they're thinking about, the marketing guys took it because they're thinking about doing a promo on it? Did it get used in your location for something? Like, you need to understand what's going on. Did it not get shipped? Did somebody screw up the receiving where they said they got 10, but they really only got 9? Like, you need to go back and root cause what's driving it, to figure out what's happening, because it having an impact on your ability to meet demand. So yes, I don't like them, but it's a necessity. Inventory has to be accurate, but the key is not so much making the adjustment, right? My policy is make the adjustment, make sure your inventory reflects exactly what you have. But it takes a whole other process where you need to go dig into what was the cause, where did it go, what happened to it? And because if you don't plug that hole, it's going to happen again, and it may happen to more than just that item, maybe others.
Okay, thank you. We've got a question from Alicia, which is, I think it's going back to your time. I'm going to think it's when you were talking about working for the optical industry. What were your sales at when you reduced your inventory from 9 to 4 million?
We did around 65, 70 million a year.
Okay.
That's what we were doing across the country. And as you said, what was happening was the practices, because nothing was integrated and people were kind of just doing their thing, and there was no policy around inventory. There was no goal. The goal was, well, we need to buy it because we have to have it. But there wasn't any thought into it, and that was driving purchases that they didn't need for stuff that they couldn't sell, and that's what drove the $9.2 million of the stuff. We reduced, we cut it in half, and we were still working on that. I don't remember what the year after that was, but we, as I said, sales went up because we changed the mix of what we had, and that's really one of the goals of inventory optimization is you want to have the right mix that best meets the demand that you have. And that's, as I said, the three areas that I talk about, and I'm going to sound like a broken record, but does it drive sales? Does it drive profitability? Does it drive cash flow? And if it doesn't do those things, then you shouldn't be putting money into it to keep it in your inventory. Leaner inventory that performs better and having a process to be able to get those things from outside is going to help be more successful. When I was at McDermott, for example, we had 120,000 SKUs. Not all of those were in the store, but what happened is I got my start in this as a special orders buyer. So anything that anybody that wasn't on our stock, wasn't on our floor, they could go to the order desk. They could say, I want this. It would get faxed to me. I'd have about 20 minutes to source it, price it, get it back to them. And if it got sold, then I would have to buy that and either send it direct or send it to the store for pickup. And that was our process for handling those things that we didn't have in stock. And we were pretty good at it. I would do, my partner and I, we would do probably 1,000, 1,200 orders a day.
Wow.
So we processed an awful lot on that. But that was our system, not to have all these other things in stock. And that's part of what I encourage you to take a look at is what if you have to really look hard at your inventory on that. So
right. Okay, well, that's a great, and just to let everybody know, we will be sending out Rick's information if anybody wants to contact him after this too, for more advice and help from Supply Chain Canada. So I think this is the last question because I know we've gone a little over, and I hope you don't have anywhere to go, Rick. Okay. This is from M. Malhotra. What about cannibalization of inventory that we have when we introduce new items? How do we forecast cannibalization? Or can you forecast cannibalization?
Well, in some cases you can. Like if you're introducing, if you're introducing a new kind of air nailer, for example, then odds are it's going to pull away from other air nailer sales. So in some cases there is a one-for-one. Installations, is a little harder. For example, like you say, hey, look, we're going to bring in a little more Roxol. Does it have an impact on fiberglass? Who knows? Maybe it does, maybe it doesn't. But you do need to take a look at that. And that's a big question that you need to have with, if you're going to introduce something new, what's it being used for? What are the customers currently using for that application, right? Do we, is this much better? Is it an innovative way to look at it? Is the cost, comparative to what they're currently using? If it's comparative and it gives better performance, there's a good chance you're going to see a decline on something like that. If it's better performance but more money to what they're currently using, it's a little harder to determine. But that's where you want to, as I said, communication is engage those people, engage those key customers and say, hey, look, let them try it. See what they think. Do this and that. Like, would you do this? Like it doesn't have to be where you've got somebody stuck in the little room and you don't let them out late a day trying to make this decision. Supply chain is very much about communication and relationships, and you need to both up and downstream, you engage those because there's a wealth of information that's available on what's going to happen. And you don't have to do big surveys or spend money on that, but just talking to your key customers about, hey, does this make sense? And if you have a new air nailer and you go show it to your top 3 customers and the both are going, this is a joke. Well, then you're probably not going to have an impact if I have to keep it on shelf because they're going to stick with what they're using. But more importantly, if they're saying it's junk, then maybe I shouldn't have it.
Right.
So
yeah.
Use the sources of information or value to make those decisions. But cannibalization, it's about half and half. Sometimes there's a one-for-one where you can say there's a direct correlation. This is going to replace something that they're already using. I anticipate just a matter of how do I anticipate how much it's going to cannibalize. And the other ones, you're going to have to do a little more, legwork to talk to people to get a sense of whether it will or not.
Okay, thank you. Well, I think that's all the questions we had. We've definitely capped you over your time. Thank you so much, and I want to thank everybody for coming.